They had everything the world could dream of: a crown, a kingdom, an empire that ruled over hundreds of millions of people. And yet the King of England gave it all away for one woman. Not for war, not for power, not for revolution, for love. They loved each other deeply, but history remembered them for tragedy. History would call it one of the greatest royal scandals ever known, a forbidden romance that shook the British monarchy to its core. But behind the headlines, behind the palace walls and newspaper outrage, was a deeply human story. A lonely king, a woman the world refused to accept, and a love so powerful it changed history forever. This is the tragic love story of King Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson. London, the 1930s. The British Empire still stood tall across the globe, though cracks were beginning to form beneath its polished surface. Europe was tense. Another war loomed quietly in the distance. Tradition ruled the monarchy like iron chains. And at the center of it all stood a prince unlike any before him. Edward, Prince of Wales, was charming, modern, and dangerously charismatic. Women adored him. Crowds worshipped him. Newspapers followed his every move like he was a movie star instead of a royal heir. But behind the confident smile, Edward was restless. He hated royal rules, hated ceremony, hated the suffocating expectations placed upon him since birth. He lived in palaces, yet often felt imprisoned inside them. Those closest to him noticed the sadness early, the loneliness, the hunger to be loved not as a prince, but simply as a man. And then one evening in 1931, everything changed. Her name was Wallis Simpson. She was American, sharp-witted, elegant, confident in a way that British aristocratic women rarely dared to be. And she was married, twice actually. In the eyes of royal society, she was entirely unsuitable. But the moment Edward met her at a dinner party hosted by friends, something shifted. She did not bow emotionally before him. Wallis teased him, challenged him, looked directly into his eyes without fear. For perhaps the first time in his life, Edward felt seen, not as His Royal Highness, not as the future king, just Edward. And that terrified him. At first, their relationship seemed harmless. A friendship, late-night conversations, private dinners, long walks through lavish estates while rain tapped gently against old windows. But slowly, the prince became obsessed. He waited for her letters, canceled royal duties to see her, called her constantly. People around him began to worry, because Wallis Simpson was becoming more than a companion. She was becoming his world. Wallis herself seemed conflicted. She understood the danger. She understood the palace whispers, the judgment, the impossible reality standing before them. A future king of England could not marry a divorced American woman. Not under royal tradition, not under the Church of England, not under the expectations of an empire built on appearances. And yet, Edward refused to let her go. By 1934, their affair had become an open secret among the British elite. Servants whispered in hallways, politicians exchanged nervous glances. Members of the royal family watched with growing horror. But Edward did not care. If anything, his love only deepened. He began imagining a future with her openly by his side. And then fate moved suddenly. In January 1936, King George V died. The prince became King Edward VIII. The most powerful man in Britain now sat on the throne. But instead of strengthening the monarchy, the crown only intensified the crisis. Because Edward no longer wanted to hide Wallis. He wanted to marry her. Choose the crown or choose Wallis. The reaction was immediate. Explosive. The British government opposed the marriage. The church opposed it. The royal family opposed it. To them, Wallis Simpson represented scandal, instability, and humiliation. A divorced woman with 2 living ex-husbands could never become queen. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin warned Edward clearly, choose the crown or choose Wallis. There could be no compromise. And suddenly, the greatest empire on earth found itself trapped inside an emotional war. Newspapers outside Britain began publishing the scandal openly. Americans were fascinated. Europe watched in disbelief. But inside England, much of the press remained silent, protecting the monarchy from public chaos. Still, rumors spread like wildfire. The king was in love, hopelessly, dangerously in love. Behind palace doors, Edward grew increasingly isolated. His family pleaded with him. Government officials begged him to reconsider. Even friends warned that Wallis herself might not want this burden, because loving a king was one thing. Destroying a monarchy for him was another. Wallis felt the pressure crushing her from every direction. People called her manipulative, ambitious, a social climber. But the reality was more complicated. She loved Edward, perhaps not with the fairy tale innocence people imagine, but deeply enough to understand the pain inside him. She knew he was emotionally fragile, hungry for affection, desperate for escape from royal duty. And she feared what would happen if he gave everything up for her. For weeks, their lives became a storm of anxiety and impossible choices. Edward barely slept. He looked exhausted during public appearances. The burden of the crown no longer resembled honor. It looked like suffering. Then came the moment that would echo through history forever. December 10th, 1936. Inside Fort Belvedere, Edward signed the abdication papers. With a few strokes of ink, the King of England surrendered his throne, a king choosing love over empire. No British monarch had willingly done such a thing in modern history. The next day, millions listened over the radio as Edward addressed the nation. "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility without the help and support of the woman I love." Those words stunned the world. Some called it romantic, others called it madness. But for Edward, it was the only choice he could live with. Or perhaps, the only choice he could not survive without. His younger brother became King George VI. The royal family turned cold toward Edward almost overnight. And just like that, the former king disappeared from the center of history. No longer His Majesty, now merely the Duke of Windsor. Months later, Edward and Wallis married in France. There was no grand royal celebration, no palace balcony, no cheering crowds outside Westminster Abbey. Not a single senior member of the royal family attended. The photographs captured smiles, elegant clothing, carefully posed happiness. But beneath it all lingered sadness, because the price of their love had already been paid. Exile. The couple spent much of their lives moving through Europe like glamorous outsiders, lavish homes, high society dinners, famous friends, but never true belonging. The royal family kept their distance. Wallis was denied the title Her Royal Highness, a wound Edward never fully forgave. And behind closed doors, their marriage was far more complicated than the fantasy the world imagined. Edward remained emotionally dependent on Wallis, almost painfully so. He revolved around her completely. Some who knew them described their relationship as passionate. Others described it as lonely. There were rumors of affairs, arguments, silences stretching across expensive rooms. Yet despite everything, they never left each other. Perhaps because they understood something few others could. No one else in the world truly understood the sacrifice they had made. Then came World War II, and controversy found them again. Edward's earlier admiration for certain aspects of Germany and his controversial meetings with Nazi officials created suspicion and outrage. The British government feared his political naivety could become dangerous. To remove him from Europe, he was appointed governor of the Bahamas during the war. For Edward, it felt humiliating. From King of England to a distant colonial post far from the power he once possessed. The glamorous love story now carried shadows of regret. There were moments when Edward seemed haunted by what he had abandoned. Not necessarily the throne itself, but purpose, identity, the meaning his life once carried. Meanwhile, Wallis often appeared trapped by the very dream she had become. The woman blamed for changing British history. The woman many would never forgive. Years passed. The world changed. Empires faded. New monarchs rose. Yet Edward and Wallis remained frozen in public memory, symbols of scandalous romance. Two aging figures walking through elegant Parisian rooms filled with ghosts. In private, Edward's devotion never faded. Even in old age, he still looked at Wallis with the same aching need that began decades earlier. When he became ill in the early 1970s, Wallis stayed close beside him. And on May 28, 1972, Edward died in Paris. He was 77 years old, the boy born to be king, the man who gave away an empire for love. was gone. At his funeral, members of the royal family attended with formal dignity, but the emotional distance remained visible even then. Wallis stood quietly in black, alone, fragile, watching the coffin disappear. After Edward's death, her world slowly collapsed into silence. She became increasingly isolated. Her health declined. Friends disappeared one by one. For years, she lived almost like a ghost behind closed curtains in Paris. And when Wallis Simpson finally died in 1986, she was buried beside Edward at Frogmore, near Windsor Castle. Together at last, back on royal ground, after decades of exile. Today, historians still debate their story. Was it true love, obsession, emotional dependence, a reckless act that endangered the monarchy? Perhaps it was all of those things at once, because real love stories are rarely simple. Edward and Wallis were not perfect lovers from a fairy tale. They hurt people, made controversial choices, carried flaws and contradictions like every human being does. But what makes their story unforgettable is the question it leaves behind. What would you sacrifice for love? A title, a future, an entire kingdom. Most people spend their lives choosing duty over desire, responsibility over emotion. Edward chose differently. And whether history views him as foolish or romantic, one truth remains impossible to deny. For a brief moment in history, the most powerful crown in the world was no match for the human heart. Maybe that is why their story still fascinates us nearly a century later. Because beneath the palace's scandals and headlines, we recognize something painfully familiar. The desire to be loved completely, to be chosen, to matter more to someone than power, tradition, or fear. And perhaps that is the tragedy of Edward and Wallis. Not that they loved too much, but that love itself could never fully save them from loneliness. Some love stories create kingdoms, others destroy them, and some change history forever.